Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston.
And as you can probably tell, we are trying something new, not just for the season, but for the show as a whole. Peter, why are the three of us chatting again, and why are we on video?
Well, the reason we're chatting again is because we missed it. We missed talking to each other and having a bit of a laugh, to be honest. And some other people said the same thing. They said they missed our what's the word? Yeah, and chemistry that we have. This unique, wonderful, beautiful Media Voices chemistry. Why are we on video? Basically, because the outtakes are just going to be hilarious. So that's the point.
Absolutely, we'll do a separate outtakes video. But also, I think it's because we want to try it because we like to practice what we preach, and we've seen video podcasts do really, really well. But also, we've been effectively doing video podcasts as long as we've been recording remotely. It's just we haven't used the video bit. So it'll be a fun experiment for us as well to see how this goes.
Chris Stone's got a really interesting little poll running on LinkedIn. I think it finishes. It might finish by the time this goes out. But he's asking, do people listen just audio? Do they listen just video? Do they listen audio and video? And it's interesting, the split. You know, the majority is still mostly audio, but there's a significant minority that's listening in video. So yeah.
So if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you want to see our faces, you can actually, if you just search for Media Voices on YouTube, you'll be able to see us hashing this up instead of just listening to us hashing it up.
And we don't actually know what it'll look like quite yet because we haven't done the background or the interstitials or anything like that. But I will say, if we do have to do an obvious cut, we will make it extremely obvious so you don't think that we are taking you for a ride. But this season, we are really pleased to have Memberful as sponsors. Memberful lets you offer membership perks and exclusive content to your audience, giving you full control over who has access to your articles, newsletters, podcast episodes, private community chats, and more. So you can take control of your publishing business this new year with Memberful. Visit memberful.com/publisherpod. That's memberful.com/publisherpod to get started with a free trial.
We probably missed a trick there. That should have been some kind of cheerleader type chant. Give me an A, give me an A.
Well, let's save that for the next video pod and do it with costumes, full costumes and makeup and everything.
Nice one.
And it's that time of year again. Entries are opened for the Publisher Podcast Awards, and the Publisher Newsletter Awards are opening on in mid-February. So you can go to publisherpodcasts.com if you want to enter the Podcast Awards, or publishernewsletters.com if you want to get alerts for the Newsletter Awards. And we're running a free masterclass at the end of February on how to write an award-winning entry for both. So if you want to head to voices.media/masterclasses, you can book that one for free.
Write it on the back of a £50 note and send it to P.O. Box Media Voices.
So, as we used to do back in the good old days, we've effectively come with one story each to discuss. And inevitably, the big news from January was that Nintendo announced the Nintendo Switch 2. So we're going to be discussing that at punishing length for you. No, we've all picked a story from January. We're going to be doing this as a bit of a monthly roundup episode, effectively, a bit of a bonus episode where we just chat about what we've taken away from the previous month. And obviously the big news from January has mostly been political, but there are some platform stories as well and some journalism stories. So I'm just going to kick off with hopefully a bit of a good news story to begin. And so consumers are...
It's all downhill from there.
And not just for this episode, but for the world. So that's good. Well, consumers are backing journalism again. Fingers crossed in the age of Trump. And I've appended this with open brackets, kinda, close brackets. So The Guardian saw a 250% increase in donations last week. This is going out, well, the end of Jan, beginning of Feb. And they garnered $4 million in pledges, and that's compared to $1.6 million in pledges from the same period last year. Now, that's coming from Semaphore, really good write-up, which also reports on a number of individual politics-focused Substacks that saw a marked increase in subscriptions and YouTube follows in the wake of the Trump inauguration. Shame on you, Snoop Dogg, for performing at that, by the way. That was hectic.
Some of the takedowns of that were brutal.
Well, deserved. Absolutely deserved. So I think maybe some of that support could be down to this incoming crackdown on press freedom. We've seen The Guardian has been really banging that drum quite heavily, so I wonder if that was part of it. But to be perfectly honest, and this is where it starts going downhill, so brace yourselves, I think it's more likely to be coming from the shrinking subset of people who are still tuned into the news regularly. We've seen big problems with news avoidance over the last couple of years. So I would love to see, for example, a breakdown of how many of the people who donated to The Guardian were new donators versus ones who were already in their ecosystem and decided to just like kick in a little bit more this month.
Well, I know people like Access have reported that there's actually not been, like, there's barely been any sort of Trump bump. So when Trump was first in power, there was a huge Trump bump in terms of traffic, subscriptions. Everyone was suddenly like, they've actually elected a lunatic. We kind of need to follow along. And this time it's like they've re-elected the lunatic and everybody's just tuning out and giving up.
I want a comparison made of Esther on this podcast in 2016 versus Esther on this podcast. She would never have said that.
Yeah, maybe
I love what we've done to Esther.
I was never a Trump supporter. Can we just go?
No, I wasn't accusing you of that. Yeah. But you were definitely the more gentle of the three of us.
Well, I think, in part, I think that was because Esther was at the time very optimistic about that kind of stuff, and now,
also,
this many years down the line,
like women in media have to be a lot more careful about what we say, how we say it, and I think I've just realised I'm not famous enough to really attract that much attention anymore. So, anyway, but
actually, that said, Peter, you got a taste of that firsthand with LinkedIn this week, didn't you?
That was nuts.
You attracted the musk nutters, didn't you?
We'll talk about that in a second.
Okay. But anyway, there has been no or very, very little visible Trump bump from, like, there was a lot of interest in election coverage, but it's basically as soon as the election was won, it's just dropped off. So it's good that people that are interested in the news are feeling more compelled to give financially. But yeah, Chris, I think it's like you said, I suspect that's people who are already engaged in the news cycle, and that a lot of people like me are just ignoring it and hoping it'll go away.
Yeah. I mean, it does speak, I think, to the altruism of people who would choose to do this. And, we've always kind of had a thing on the Publisher podcast for altruism-based journalism, less about VC and individuals being altruistic, and more about kind of the collective donations from an audience that really does want other people to be informed as they are. But there is, I think, again, Esther, to your point, people are just tuning out, and I think that's in part due to this ongoing trust issue, which we've been banging that drum for years and years and years as well. But it feels like it's been exacerbated again by this latest election cycle. I read an interview with Aidan White, who's the founder of the Ethical Journalism Network, and he offers a reasonably good explanation, I think, for why that trust crisis is still around, even though people demand high-quality news information, and they need it more now than ever, really. So he argues that while the press did a good job covering, Trump's many failings, weaknesses, and criminal acts, and you can argue that they didn't do that, they didn't connect with the concerns of their readers again. So they didn't talk about the price of eggs in the same way that Trump did, and then immediately abandoned when he got into the White House. But short of ripping up the entire news industry from the roots and getting people in who are more representative, I'm not sure that the industry, the ecosystem, is going to learn anything from that again. I think we're too highfalutin. I think we're too focused on basically reporting on what we want and we think is important, rather than what the public actually wants.
I think that's interesting because I know. So I wrote a newsletter about when the news that Zuckerberg was abandoning fact checking first came out. And I wrote that on pure anger.
Yeah.
It was just, I saw it and I thought, right, I'm sat down and I just banged out whatever it was, 800 words in an hour of a couple of hours. And I think that drives a lot of left-leaning journalists to do what they do. And in that sense, maybe we're as guilty of being sort of driven by the outrage engine as anyone else.
100%.
So you're right. There does need to be a kind of... we've got to lift our eyes a little bit. These headphones are doing my head in. Keep falling
I think we saw that in the UK as well. I know there are a lot of people critical about the UK coverage because the media were getting very hyped up about sort of slip-ups people have said and people done. And actually what people really care about is child poverty, the fact that you can't get an NHS dentist appointment for the love of money. And like none of that was being addressed by the politicians. I think that very much played out in the fact that there was quite low voter engagement this year. And it's like, well, if you're not going to fix any of the problems we care about, potholes, the state of roads and bins and council, like that sort of thing that people really actually care about that affects their day-to-day life, not whether somebody said something, in the back end of a pub somewhere. I found the news cycle this year in the UK quite frustrating.
I think
Don't get me started on potholes.
I was just about to say, I think it's so fascinating that potholes have become emblematic for that issue.
Child poverty is obviously significantly more serious, but like there is a lot tied up in there.
Definitely.
They're not getting down to what people care about and actually affects their lives.
There was a really good piece from James O'Malley who's talking about how AI could actually genuinely help address the problems of potholes. And I was like, well, that's the local news industry destroyed, because without potholes, they don't have any pictures of people stood next to them or pointing at these potholes to lead their stories.
With like a 6-inch ruler, or like holding the 6-inch
exactly,
ruler.
Yeah.
Getting out their old geometry sets so they can put the 6-inch ruler in the pothole.
Getting people to stand in them to go like, look how deep this is. That's it. That's the local news industry in this country decimated. But I think let's get on to the meat and potatoes of this episode, because, I started us on a high. But like you said, Peter, it's all going to go downhill this year. So what?
There's no question. I mean, the big thing for me, we're talking about this in the round, but the wrapper on that for me is just how the billionaire media bros just properly bent over. Like Snoop Dogg is just, the most kind of strangest example. Zuckerberg, for me, so the way I framed this in this little headline that we've got is that the media bros showed their true colours, and those colours was green for greed, yellow for cowardism. Is that a word?
Yeah, cowardice.
And obviously shirty, black and brown shirty.
I laughed at that because otherwise I would have cried.
It's just, you couldn't have written a script. Well, maybe you could have written a script. I'm not clever enough to have written a script, but it took me absolutely by surprise how quickly they all totally capitulated. And the Atlantic's got a piece. The headline on this piece is, when fear spreads in a society, powerful people who know better are often the first to show their weakness. And my God, did they show their weaknesses.
Just itching for excuses to do half of this stuff and then doing the rest to, like you said, kiss the ring.
I think you could see this after the Washington Post pulled their endorsements before the election, though.
Absolutely. That was a Canadian. And it wasn't just the Washington Post, the top LA Times. So the big one for me, the anger, the thing that I wrote in anger was Zuckerberg's absolute, utter abdication of responsibility. Not just over fact-checking, but if you look at some of the changes that he made to the DE&I policy, the guidelines, the things you can see on Facebook or Instagram or wherever now are unbelievable.
That wasn't Meta, wasn't it, where they said, oh, actually, one of the board members came out and said, oh, actually, it's good that we've got rid of, protection.
The oversight people,
around what you can say about trans people, because actually this will encourage supporters of trans people to be more vocal. It's like, shut the fuck up! What are you talking about? You know what that's going to encourage is a pile-on.
And then we had Zuckerberg with the whole, we need more masculine energy in companies.
It's disgusting.
Because he's obviously clearly like a beacon of masculine energy.
But I wouldn't want to meet him in the back alley. I think he's quite a good fighter, isn't he? He's been doing jiu-jitsu or something.
But that's the thing, is that there's this focus on what is masculine and whatever, and it's just poisoned their minds.
I'll tell you what's not masculine, that fucking perm that he's got. What the hell is that about? So he's not the only one, right? Google, which is a faceless corporation, we haven't got a human being to hang this one on. Google has said, following Trump's mad assertion that the Gulf of Mexico is actually the Gulf of America, Google's capitulated and said, yeah, okay, no problem, we'll change that. As soon as you get it into law, we'll change that on maps for the US. So not only did America now have the World Series, where no one else plays in it, the wrong measurement system, But also they call this huge area of water a different thing from everyone else on the planet. So God bless America.
Well, God bless the world. Not to play devil's advocate here, because we're far past the point where we should ever do that, but Google Maps apparently is following a long-standing policy, according to it, of showing the local official name for geographical areas. So obviously Gulf of America, Mount McKinley. Again, I think it is just pure cowardice on their part, and everybody should be very vocal in that. But also, does that mean that's just brought to my attention the fact that they're probably doing this in other areas? In fact, they're definitely doing it in other areas. So Russia, Ukraine. What the fuck does Google Maps look like if you're in Russia? I mean, it's just bringing to light the fact that these people will bend the knee to anybody if it will turn a profit.
Well, I want Scotland just basically changed to God's country, and that's happening. I'm starting a petition. So then we've got the capitulator in chief, Jeffrey Bezos, who is now very optimistic that President Trump is serious about his regulatory agenda, meaning he'll pay even less fucking tax. If he can help him, he's going to help him, because there's too much regulation in America. And that's after he ordered the Washington Post not to run the Harris endorsement.
That's ridiculous. Did they not also fire a cartoonist for making fun of Bezos's, the tendency to bend the knees?
Face.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, what he's really saying is, I'm desperate for Trump to give me some money for my little space rocket. That's really what he's saying. He's like Marvin the Martian.
Well, if you're willing
Where's my money? That space creature's stolen my money.
That was not on my bingo list for today. It was Peter doing a Marvin the Martian impression. But
next up. No, go on.
I was going to say, if you're willing to do that and cost the Washington Post 10% of its subscriber base by, nailing your colours to the Trumpy mast, then that does speak to what your real agenda is, your real priorities.
Yeah, money.
And it's not supporting the media.
Oh, it's money. So, talking to people that are not supporting the media, LA Times, Patrick Soon-Seong, who bought the LA Times in 2018. He also blocked a Harris endorsement, changing decades of history, where they actually did make a presidential endorsement. Although I believe that they actually endorsed Nixon just before the Watergate scandal, so they've got history on that one. So he did that. They lost the long-serving opinion editor. He's now instituted a bias meter, which can show people if, I don't know if it's up yet, but basically the idea is show people if this is too left-leaning. That's probably how it works. It's probably him going like that.
That's insane.
We can do this if we want to do video. This is brilliant. So here's the interesting part of this. He has acknowledged, this is according to an article in the LA Times, which is actually interesting. He's acknowledged that he paid less attention to the Times for much of the first 6.5 years of his ownership. What do you think changed that now he's paying attention? So my last rant is on.
Hang on, can I just say though, would we? And again, I'm not playing devil's advocate. It's just a fun thought experiment for the two of you. Would we be as annoyed about this had it been on the other side of the political spectrum? Had he suddenly blocked a Republican endorsement instead of a Democratic endorsement?
100%. Nah, that's the worst devil's advocate you've ever come up with. No, because I think the person that resigned as the opinions editor from the LA Times would equally have probably resigned if it had gone the other way. If it was, I don't know if Biden had still been there or if it was Harris. If he said, Biden is clearly not fit, so let's endorse Trump, I think people would have had the same reaction. Right thinking people. The point is again, there's a CJR piece on this, which I think I've linked, And what it says is that millionaires, billionaires, whatever, have owned media for years and years and years and years, centuries.
Oh, God, since the invention of the printing press, really.
And what smart owners do is they hire really clever people and they just let them get on with it. And that was the whole church and state thing. You know, even, I'm not sure I believe I'm going to say this, but even Rupert Murdoch has done that, right?
What in the fuck is
No,
this?
but he has. He's, you know, serious papers anyway. He's rarely got directly involved. Don't come at me for that. If there's good examples of him getting involved, I hold my hand up. But I can't think of that many. I mean, he sets an agenda and a tone, absolutely, but he's not getting directly involved. So I don't know.
I mean, I think that's a bigger question here about endorsements at all. And I know that there were some really, really good pieces on both sides of the spectrum that said, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. But I think one of them, I'm trying to remember who wrote it now, said that there's this potential connection between trust and endorsements. And actually, if you do endorse, it is seen as slightly eroding that trust in neutrality. But then other people say, well, we're not neutral. Actually, if somebody's running for election that is a complete turnip, it's our job to say that. So it's difficult. And I know that there are papers in the UK this year that, again, held their hands up and like, actually, we're not endorsing, or we're going to endorse the other way this time. That I'm really trying to remember who wrote the piece about the Washington Post when they said it's not that they didn't endorse, it's that they chose not to endorse like 2 weeks before the election.
Yeah, it was the timing of that one that was just bullshit.
That's really interesting.
I mean, the other thing, we years and years ago, I talked to Jay Rosen for the podcast, and he's got this thing about news from nowhere, that there's no such thing, right?
Yeah,
everything comes with some form of opinion. It's the processes and the checks and balances that keeps it sensible. I don't know. It's the direct involvement that bothers me. That's a bit that I think's just
welcome
beyond
to 2025, folks.
Talking about direct involvement, my last shout out is reserved for the fucking moron that owns X or Twitter or X-Twitter, whatever you call it. I've got no words. I have no words. Actually, I do. I wrote them in a Substack that was, again, fueled by anger.
Where can you find that Substack?
magazinediaries.com. You know, so let's not get into the salute or the not salute or whatever the hell you call it. It doesn't matter. I got absolutely slaughtered on this on LinkedIn for saying it doesn't matter if he meant to do that Nazi salute. Doesn't matter. Because to me, that was just a dog whistle to all the people that were looking for permission to be able to do their own little Zekiels.
Well, it was also the fact that people were like, oh, well, that wasn't, he was just, it's just a man expressing himself. And it's like, again, that's not the point. It's part of this huge wider mix of all the other crazy stuff he's said and done.
It's totally. Well, people, again, on LinkedIn, so I got accused of being silly, which really stung.
Oh, that's the worst one, yeah.
That was the worst one.
I will also say you can find pictures of Kamala Harris also apparently doing a Nazi salute.
No,
but that's not the context. That's not a video.
Yeah, it's
Kamala
very
Harris.
in the video.
I almost did it there, and I thought, you know what? I'm not actually.
Please don't.
I'm not joining that.
Our very first video podcast, Peter C. Gales.
Kamala Harris is lifting her hand to wave to people, and a still photograph is taken, and it looks like a salute. That's not what he did, and he did it twice. The other one, so I got called silly, horrible, toxic, I'm part of the problem, and part of that was because I was accused of spreading misinformation because I said that he'd done this salute, and I didn't say that, and I didn't say he was a Nazi. What I said was he was enabling people who are Nazis. And I think that's a problem. There was other people who excused him on the basis of his autism. Yeah. Being neurospicy is not the same as being a neo-Nazi, right? That's two very different things.
Do you see George Takei's tweet about it? Or Blue Sky, message on Blue Sky?
I definitely didn't see his tweet because that was the whole reason I started.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
What do we call Blue Sky?
I think it's just posts.
Posts. Okay, all right, I'll go posts.
I know it's less interesting. Imagine giving up all that equity that you had with Twitter to just destroy. Anyway, but George Takei said, "I'm going to karate kick a Nazi in the throat and say it was autism. It was because of my autism." I thought that was a perfect response. But it's ridiculous. Mental. And also, Musk then went on to speak at an AfD rally, so it's not like he doesn't have form for this kind of stuff.
Exactly, there's context. Context is everything.
But did you see what people are calling Teslas now?
Oh, I've seen all sorts.
I missed that. What are they calling Teslas?
Swastikars. It's ridiculous, but it does go back to what you were talking before about the outsized influence of billionaires and oligarchs on the media ecosystem, because Twitter used to be a fantastic space. It used to be where a lot of really good discussion took place, and that has been taken away now. And for as good as it is, and I am enjoying it, Blue Sky isn't yet on that kind of forum level for people, and it means that newspapers have lost another channel by which they can talk to audiences outside their own ecosystem. Although it has been heartening to see how many places have just removed Twitter from their strategies lately.
Definitely. I don't see Blue Sky as the same sort of real-time platform as Twitter was.
I mean, there were also issues as Tristan, and it did end up in a bit of a media bubble where the media would talk to media people about media stuff and saw stories, and it did become a bit of an easy way out rather than actually getting off your desk and going and talking to real people. So it wasn't paradise.
No, not at all.
But they did at least try and fix some of the problems.
Yeah, that was the sad part. It was making progress towards some of that stuff.
But it's like breaks off everything now. It's like breaks off X, breaks off Meta's platforms. Quite frightening.
So this leads me to my point. I actually have a point. Every single publisher now that's on a third-party platform has to just take this moment to understand what loads of people have been saying forever. The only reason to be on these platforms is to fire people back to your own stuff. And then when you get them there, sign them up. Is that a subscription? Is it a newsletter sign up? Is it a podcast subscription? Whatever it is, own the audience. Take it back. What was my little phrase here? I was quite proud of it. Take back control from these MAGA death cult enabling asshats. That's the point of all of that.
I thought it was going to be something pithy and
It is pithy.
It is pithy, but I thought
MAGA
it was going to be less emotive.
Enabling asshat is a pithy phrase.
It's like you're writing Warhammer fan fiction with that.
I might get T-shirts made. Yeah. No, seriously, publishers have got to take it back. And wearing my print evangelist hat rather than my MAGA hat.
MAGA death hat.
This is where I think print is actually in a good place right now, because we have got that, such a overused phrase, but that carefully curated, slow, well-reported approach to media that print is excellent at. But actually even digitally, Rob Cobridge at Glide talked about the formal process of publishing, and that is perfect. Whether it's the Times or even the Telegraph or the Guardian or the New Statesman or the Spectator, whoever it is, there's a proper process there around the journalism. And it doesn't matter if it's right-leaning or left-leaning. There's a proper process that these nut jobs have killed on every other platform.
Can I get a plug in for this week's podcast guest?
Go on.
Go.
So we spoke to Hannah Ballantyne this week on the podcast. She's the she runs the social media for which is like a consumer campaigns publication in the UK. And we talked about things like TikTok, and we talked about what platforms publishers should be on. And she said that for them, she said basically publishers should really carefully consider ethically what platforms they're on. They've chosen to remain on X because they are very consumer focused, and there's things about plug socket covers for kids that they do want to get out to as many people as possible. But she said the question for them is actually, where do we spend the money on things like advertising and promotion, and who are we giving that money to that definitely needs to be more of a consideration. So it's not even necessarily about the presence on those platforms, although I know things like The Guardian have come off X for ethical reasons. It's if you're promoting and paying to promote your stuff, give that a good think. And again, she reiterated Peter's point about make sure it's always driving back to your own properties.
Gotta be.
Nice.
So that was my rant for January.
But
I think mine might be a little bit less spicy by comparison then.
Can I just throw something in, just because we do need to get onto TikTok, because that's been a saga. But I think that does go back to what we were talking there, about the process of publishing. It's not about being unbiased. You can't be unbiased, but you can be transparent about what you're doing. And when billionaires with their hands their grubby little hands all over the printing presses do stuff like that, they're not being transparent about why they're doing it, which is for, monetary reasons. But a good editor can say, we will endorse, and we're endorsing for these reasons. And hopefully that does stem some of that drop in trust that Esther was talking about. Because you can't be unbiased, but you can be transparent. And that's my rant.
TikTok. Quick question before we get into that. Did either of you actually think TikTok would ever end up being banned?
No, I thought it'd get worked out.
I thought it would take longer than it did.
I didn't think it was going to get banned at all. I thought it was a storm in a teacup. All the stuff about, sending data to China, which has been so funny to see the rise of stuff like, what is it, Red Notice and and DeepSeek, which are just doing it but 10 times worse and 10 times more explicitly in the wake of the ban.
Trump's come out today and said, I really might want DeepSeek.
All right. We're going to get into that. Bit of context. I also didn't think it'd get banned. So there was this huge long saga over the last 2 months in the US courts where TikTok was given until January the 19th to be sold to US buyer or be banned over, so a quote here, security and links to the Chinese government. These are legitimate concerns, by the way, but it's just, it did feel a little bit like they were picking on TikTok, and like you said, there's some other really problematic stuff out there that they're just gossiping at. But anyway, so last weekend, Trump, who then took office like 24 hours later, he said he'd probably give TikTok a 90-day reprieve from the ban. So for around 24 hours, when US users logged in, they were met with this little message to explain that they couldn't use the app right now. But this is the... We're fortunate that President Trump has indicated he'll work with us on a solution to reinstate TikTok once he takes office, which of course the chief executive of ByteDance was also invited to the inauguration. So Trump did on Monday, when he took office, sign an executive order. He gave him 75 days. As of today, apparently Microsoft are in talks to buy it. So, the politics here is like absolutely bananas. I feel like we've actually been quite politics heavy, so we're going to just... I don't want to say anything before we gloss over any more politics.
I fucking love the prospect of Bill Gates buying TikTok. Is Bill Gates still involved in Microsoft?
I think
my head goes straight to that.
Why is Musk not pitched his hat in the ring for this? I thought it was right to be straight.
Well, it's him or Mr. Beast or
He's
somebody.
He's already got one toxic platform. He doesn't need any more. I just thought, I just immediately flashed onto the idea of Bill Gates leading the team that bought TikTok and doing a TikTok video that was like that one when they announced Microsoft 90, whatever it was. And just like these weird pocket protector bros doing the TikTok dance that everyone was copying for a while. Just brilliant. Just properly made me laugh. There is some joy left in the world.
Yeah. Anyway. Apparently, though, the shutdown didn't actually... It was a sort of 24-hour-ish shutdown. It didn't apparently have much of an effect on publisher traffic. I think because this has been in the works for a while... publishers are taking steps to move stuff elsewhere, or at least build up audiences elsewhere. And I think the change that has happened recently that maybe wouldn't have happened a couple of years ago is that publishers are producing content for, they're producing the same content for YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok, Snap. So just taking all those out.
Snap, is that still a thing?
Snap's big. It's still the fourth or fifth most popular social media app, but it doesn't get the press attention. So yeah, it doesn't seem to have hit publishers as such. Although I'll also say the ban did happen on a Sunday, so I don't know how big a day really that is.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Is that not a day of rest?
interesting to see in the Reuters tech predictions report this year, which was obviously way before the ban. The survey was done way before the ban. But there's a big number of people planning to spend a lot of time on TikTok. And publishers investing in TikTok. I think it was 4th or 5th in terms of the platforms. So I don't know. Does that change? Do people think, well, maybe not?
Maybe they'll hedge a little bit, but I can't see. I mean, now of all things, I mean, surely with the backing of Microsoft, they'll feel more secure than ever about getting on there.
Don't start me off again.
Again, a plug for this Hannah Ballantyne episode, which if you're listening should be the one just before this. She said that part of the consideration for them going on was like, was this sort of effort potential payoff? And they've only got a team of 6, so they did have to really consider this carefully. And because they're already producing the short form video for elsewhere, it's not a lot of extra effort to put it on another platform. And again, if that gets taken away, they're not losing much except potential viral audience reach. So it's very much they don't lose anything if they don't.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Her interview was really interesting in terms of how you don't necessarily have to have that huge audience on TikTok to see some like real viral traffic. I would be astonished if we saw many publishers exit that as they have X, just because there's still the opportunity for that.
Unless Musk buys it, who knows?
Well, exactly.
I mean, there was a government minister who gave an interview to the BBC about the ban last week, and he turned around and was like, "Oh, we don't think it's that much of a threat as an app, because if consumers want to post videos of their cats dancing, that doesn't seem like a security threat to me." Which was a really, really naive thing to say from a... should I be surprised it's someone from government minister?
Yeah.
My favourite quote on all of this, though, has to be from Casey Newton, a platformer, who called TikTok Schrodinger's app. So he said that TikTok is not dead, but nor is it fully alive. It exists in a state of quantum superposition, both there and not at the same time. It's fate dependent on a series of random subatomic events that may or may not occur.
By subatomic, does he mean Trump's brain?
Oh, wonderful. So we're in a position now where publishers can and can't plan, and also should and shouldn't be planning for this kind of stuff.
Ooh.
Publishers in the US...
true.
UK, obviously, if you're focused on the UK, there is no ban in the UK unless you're a government minister, it's not pending. So it depends how important the US audience is to you.
And the government ministers clearly aren't using it anyway, because so that's good that ban's held.
But I suppose we're 2 months out from they've got to find a buyer in the next 2 months, and if they don't, will Trump actually stick to his guns and uphold the ban? Will the Supreme Court pitch in and be like, no, you have to uphold the ban? Or will they get bought by Bill Gates?
I'm going to nail my colours to the mast here and say that not only will a buyer be found, it will be rushed through, and it will be a buyer who is in thrall to the Trump administration.
Well, that's any of the tech bros.
Well, exactly. It's a safe bet.
Okay, I'm not convinced the buyer will materialise, because I think if that was going to happen, they'd have done it before the January the 19th deadline.
Interesting.
I think the TikTok CEO will try and wrangle something with Trump where it doesn't have to be sold off.
Maybe I'll just apply for American citizenship.
Oh, wait.
And Trump would give him it, despite all his deportations and ICE raids and all of this.
Oh.
He would give him American citizenship.
Yeah, there's no principle there. It's all just hypocrisy and just doing it's performative, cruelty. But again, that's politics.
Anyway, if you're a publisher with a TikTok strategy, what do you do? Who knows at this point?
Anything you do, you use it to drive people back to your own platform and own the audience.
Yeah. And if you're using, I guess if you're on TikTok, just spread those eggs.
Oof.
I don't get
No,
it.
that's not the phrase, is it? That sounds gross. Put your little egg videos in many, many video platform baskets.
That's it. That's the one.
Sorry,
that's a TikTok
them
clip,
eggs.
if ever there was one. I hope it calms down, so by the time we're doing this in February, we can actually talk about some interesting publisher moves.
We're 5 days into his presidency.
I know.
It's not going to calm down.
Okay, so again, that's the scary part of this, because this is just classic Bannon strategy, right? He's flooding the end zone with shit. He doesn't care what the Gulf of Mexico is called. He probably isn't really going to buy Greenland, or actually he wasn't buying it, he's going to take it over. He's just flooding the end zone with shit.
But okay, well, how about this? Because we were talking about publishers actually speaking to what matters to the public. How do they cut through that noise? What should they be focusing on when
who's really
ecosystem? Go on. I was just going to say when the digital news ecosystem is so dominated by those attention-grabbing stories. How do we?
Do you know who's really good on this and really hot on this at the moment is Thomas Bechdel. Thomas is writing all the time about the importance of news that is important to the individual. He did a piece about his local area, and here's a newspaper, whatever the newspaper is in Denmark, and it's all Trump and Musk and all that bullshit. And then he did this personalised news version, and it was about local school boards, and like Esther was talking about bin collections and stuff like that. And he's really interested on that at the moment, because I think he's right that publishers at some level have to start focusing on what's really important to people.
I think that's especially true if you're not in the US. Like if you're in the US, we pray for you, but if you're not in the US, it doesn't affect our day-to-day lives in the same way. So
100%.
like NHS dentistry, please, flood alerts, please.
Was that? Am I wrong? About 2 years ago, did the Wall Street Journal not launch a newsletter that was only for major events, and it was irregular?
It did.
Go, what? How does it? What is going on at that newsletter these days? Is it not being sent out every 2 minutes?
I don't know. Maybe we should check in.
Yeah. But that's a really, really good point, Esther.
Well, that's what it used to call the BBC app during COVID, wasn't it? The What Now app.
Yeah. My abiding memory of the BBC Breaking News app is still when it sent me an alert at like 6 o'clock in the morning to tell me that Beyonce wasn't pregnant. Which I wouldn't mind, except at that time she was. So it was like, it was not just incorrect, it was invasive as well.
Incorrect, inconvenient, and inconsequential.
Oh, are you pitching us a new tagline? The
3 eyes of news.
Well, God, if you can stomach them, the show notes for this are going to be at voices.media, where you can also sign up to the Publisher newsletter, our weekly deep dive into all things publishers, podcasts, and occasionally we'll dip our toe into politics as well, when it's relevant.
Oh, the 3 Ps.
3 Ps, 3 Is.
And the next episode we have is me speaking with Katie Vanek-Smith, which I'm so excited about.
Yeah,
Katie
fantastic.
is the chief exec at Hearst UK and is all about memberships at the moment, and that's what I'll be talking to Katie about. Long experience from national newspapers to Tortoise, so yeah, that is going to be a good one.
We've all spoken, I think, to Katie a couple of times, and we've had her at one of our events as well, and every single time I get something new out of it, so looking forward to that one. But that episode and this season in its entirety is sponsored by Memberful, a best-in-class membership solution giving you full control over your content. You can find out more about how it can help diversify your revenue streams and connect with your audience at memberful.com/publisherpod.
And if you're listening to this or watching this and you have your own amazing podcast or video podcast, you can enter it for the Publisher Podcast Awards. We do have a best video podcast strategy. So you've got until March the 14th. You can see more about that at publisherpodcasts.com. We're planning like a whole 2 days around it, where we've got the Publisher App Summit, Print Summit, Newsletter Summit and Podcast Summit, and the Newsletter and Podcast Awards. I'm going to be dead by the end of it. Lots more to come about that soon. More info at publisherpodcasts.com.
Fantastic. We will be back with another video podcast, another roundup from the 3 of us about everything that's happened in February towards the end of next month. But as Peter said, we'll be back on Monday with that Katie Vanek-Smith episode. But until then, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.